Malachar's spectral form regarded Raiskin with profound gratitude and a flicker of uncertainty. "You would entrust me with this charge?" he asked, voice resonant and strangely human. Raiskin nodded, his words steady. "You know the pain of being forgotten better than any of us. As a guardian, you can help us remember, guide us when we falter, so that the cycle never begins anew." A hush fell as Malachar turned to the gathered assembly. For a moment the air thickened with memorying the grief of exile, the hope of reconciliation, the shimmering promise of unity. "Then let it be so," Malachar intoned. As he spoke, the web of memory pulsed, and his form diffused, no longer a solitary spectre, but a presence woven through the hall's archives and very stones of the academy. The wards shimmered, adopting the gentle hue of his light, suffusing every artifact and corridor with the promise of remembrance. Marinol wiped a tear from her cheek, smiling as the locket's glow settled into a steady, reassuring heartbeat. Professor Nevern bowed deeply, voice full of reverence. "Let this be the new tradition, the watcher remembered, the lost honored, and the living forever bound in truth. Raiskin, you have set us on a new path." As the ritual's energy faded to a gentle warmth, Raiskin sensed a question lingering in the hearts of all present. How would they commemorate this moment? What symbol or act would mark the birth of this new covenant between the Academy, its guardian, and the generations to come? The Hall of Founders, still aglow with the memory-infused aura of the ritual, fell silent as Raiskin spoke his proposal. "Let us mark this day, every year, as the day of remembrance. Let no story, no sorrow, be hidden again." The words resonated through the assembly. Marinol, eyes shining, nodded and conjured gentle illusions of lanterns drifting upward, each bearing a name or memory. Professor Nevron placed a steady hand on Raiskin's shoulder, his voice echoing in the transformed hall. "Let the first tradition be the lighting of the lanterns. Each of us will share a memory, so all may remember, and none need bear their pain alone." Archmage Randall raised his staff, the black crystal humming softly in agreement. "So it shall be. The day of remembrance will anchor our future. Malachar, as our watcher, will guide and witness, ensuring the chain remains unbroken." Around Raiskin, the crowd offered smiles, some tentative, some radiant. Lorali slipped through to stand beside him, her hand finding his. The sense of unity was palpable, the network of artifacts now a living web of memory and hope. The Academy, once fractured by secrecy, had chosen to remember together. A new tradition, and a new safeguard, had been born, shaped by the courage of those willing to speak their truth. Raiskin stepped into the center of the hall, feeling the weight of every gaze. Students, professors, friends, even the Watcher's spectral presence. He drew the locket from around his neck, its surface shimmering with the memories of his ancestors and the legacy of shadow magic he bore. Swallowing, he spoke, his voice quiet but unwavering, carrying through the hushed chamber. "Ami, most painful memory is not a single moment, but the silence that grew between myself and those I loved whenever the shadow pressed too close. There was a night, alone in my academy cell, when the darkness in my mind was so heavy I nearly surrendered to it. I thought if I vanished, if I was simply forgotten, the pain would end. But it was Moranel's laughter, Tavern's stubborn hope, Lorali's vow, and all your stories, spoken tonight, that showed Meg's sorrow shared can become strength." He opened the locket, letting its gentle light shine on the audience. This is my promise egg, I will not hide my pain, nor let your names be lost to shadow. On this day of remembrance, let us speak our truths, even the ones that ache, so we may heal together. A ripple of emotion swept through the hall. Malachor's form, now woven into the Academy's wards, nodded in silent approval. As the lanterns rose, casting their glow across the marble pillars and gathered faces, Raiskin felt, for the first time, a true sense of belonging. The new tradition was not just a ritual. It was a vow to remember, and to be remembered. Professor Nevern knelt before the ancient grimoire, its leather cover emblazoned with the sigil of Blackstaff Academy and the faded marks of centuries. With careful reverence, he pressed his palm to the cover, channeling a thread of silver-blue magic into its waiting wards. The book responded, opening to an empty page that shimmered with possibility. Raiskin Durander, will you speak the words? Nevern asked, offering the quill. Raiskin accepted, his hand steady as he inscribed the date and the ceremony's purpose, the founding of the Day of Remembrance, the reweaving of the Academy's wards, and the appointment of Malachor as watcher. As he wrote, the lanterns overhead flared in reflection, their light dancing across the faces of students and staff. The ink glowed briefly, as if the grimoire itself recognized the weight of this covenant. Mirinal stepped forward, her illusionary lanterns circling the hall, and added her own name to the page. Followed by Tavern, his handwriting bold and determined, then Lorali, her letters precise. One by one others came forth, each contributing a memory, a name, or a vow. Soon the page overflowed with stories, weaving a tapestry of loss, hope, and unity. The Grimaire's wards pulsed, sealing the memories so they could never again be erased by fear or neglect. Above them, Malachor's spectral form shimmered with contentment. The web of artifacts, once a network of corruption, now thrummed with purpose. The Academy's wounds, though deep, had begun to heal. A new era forged by remembrance was inscribed for all generations to come. At Raiskin's invitation, the spectral form of Malachor drifted to the center of the hall, flickering between shadow and gentle radiance. Though his outline shimmered with an ethereal sorrow, his presence felt calm. No longer a force of dread, but of remembrance. The lantern light reflected in his hollow eyes, and for a moment, the centuries of solitude and pain seemed to fade. Malachor's voice, though distant, resonated through the marble pillars. You have done what I could not, generations ago. You have chosen to remember not only triumph but loss. This web, once a snare, is now a net to catch those who might fall into despair. Let each artifact, each story remain a thread, binding you together not in secrecy but in shared hope. He turned slowly, facing students and faculty alike. The Academy's strength is not in its walls or wards, but in the courage to face sorrow and speak it aloud. Guard your memories, cherish your bonds. When darkness stirs again, as it surely will, let remembrance and unity be your first defense. I will watch, but I am not your shield. You are each other's. As his form faded back toward the hall's far wall, a new sense of purpose settled over the gathering. Raiskin felt the truth in Malachor's final words. The legacy of shadow would persist, but it could now serve as a warning and a guide. The network of artifacts, once a web of corruption, had become a living tapestry watched over by those who remembered and those who chose never to forget. The hall gradually emptied as lanterns dimmed and whispers faded into the marble corridors. Raiskin lingered near the dais, his locket warm against his chest, until Archmage Randall approached in a hush of robes. The Blackstaff's expression was neither stern nor gentle, but searching, a man measuring the weight of a new future. Together, they slipped into a side chamber lined with arcane shields and ancient banners. Randall gestured for Raiskin to sit beside a table where a map of the academy was spread, covered in fresh sigils and sketches of new warding patterns. The Archmage's voice was low. Safeguards must be woven not just into stone, but into hearts and habits. The Day of Remembrance is a start, but shadow finds cracks. What would you propose, Raiskin Durander, as one who knows its touch so intimately? Raiskin hesitated. The memory of Malakor's voice, of isolation and longing, echoed within. We cannot forbid sorrow or fear. Instead, let us create a place where even the most painful stories may be spoken without shame. A sanctuary, supervised, yes, but open to all, where memories may be shared and warded, not hidden. Randall nodded, considering. And what of the artifact network? Its threads are not all known. The distributor, the so-called lieutenant, must be found. I trust you sense what I dog. Someone has shaped your path, not just followed it. Tomorrow, we begin our search. Together. Raiskin and Randall stood side by side, the map of the academy between them, as the Archmage lifted his staff and murmured a call to Malachar. The faintest tremor in the air signaled the Watcher's arrival. A shimmer of shadow and starlight gathering near the silver, warded wall. Malachar's form was more defined than before, his scholar's robes drifting in a spectral wind, his countenance marked by grave kindness. We seek the lieutenant, the one who moves the artifacts through hidden hands. Randall intoned, offering Malachar the map. Raiskin felt a chill as the Watcher's long fingers brushed the parchment. Shadows rippled across the inked pathways, swirling toward a cluster of old storage rooms beneath the east wing. Malachar's voice was soft, but carried the weight of centuries. The lieutenant hides behind many faces, but one thread runs through them all, a whisper of sorrow, kept just out of sight. Follow the pain that lingers where none dare speak. Raiskin's heart pounded as the shadows coalesced on a single room, marked with a sigil he recognized from his own locket. The same ancestral glyph that bound his family's legacy to shadow magic. Randall's eyes narrowed. You see it too, Raiskin. This was never just chance. The lieutenant has known your story. The realization struck. Someone had been guiding not just the artifacts, but Raiskin's very path, shaping his journey from the moment he entered the academy. The time for confrontation had come. Randall rested a steadying hand on Raiskin's shoulder. We go together, but you must lead the way. Torchlight flickered along the stone walls as Raiskin led Archmage Randall and the spectral form of Malachar down a narrow flight of steps beneath the east wing. The air grew colder with each descent, thick with centuries-old dust and the hum of dormant wards. At the bottom, a heavy oak door stood before them, carved with the same ancestral sigil that marked Raiskin's locket. An unmistakable sign that this place was tied to his family's shadowed legacy. Raiskin pressed his palm against the sigil, feeling a subtle pulse of magic respond. The lock yielded with a creak, and the door swung inward to reveal a cramped storage room cluttered with crates, ledgers, and faded banners. But at its center, a single figure waiting, a masked person in a dark blue cloak, seated calmly atop a battered chest, the mask silver, expressionless, gleamed in the dim light. The lieutenant. Raiskin's heart thudded. The sense of being watched, guided, now had a face. The lieutenant's voice, low and oddly familiar, echoed in the small chamber. "Welcome, Raiskin Durander. You have walked every path I set before you, sometimes with hope, sometimes with sorrow. You were never merely a pawn, but a key. Even now, you lead them here." Arundel's staff glowed, and Malachur's shadowy presence swirled protectively around Raiskin. The masked lieutenant inclined their head, as if in respect. "Ask your questions. The truth was never meant for me alone." The lieutenant's silver mask glinted in the half-light as Raiskin's accusation echoed through the cramped chamber. The masked figure was silent for a heartbeat, then answered with calm certainty. "Because only through suffering does the truth come to light. You, Raiskin, needed to walk through pain, not to break, but to understand what lies beneath the Academy's polished stone. Every step you took, every wound you suffered, was meant to bring you to this moment." Raiskin bristled. "You speak of suffering as if it were a lesson. What of those who fell along the way? The friends I nearly lost? The darkness I carry?" The lieutenant leaned forward, voice softening. "You were never alone. I whispered warnings, left clues, shielded you when the shadows grew too deep. Not to spare you pain, but to make you strong enough to bear the truth. Blackstaff's wounds are old. Only someone marked by both sorrow and hope could remake its future. You are not a pawn, Raiskin. You are the inheritor, and the catalyst." Randall's staff pulsed with restrained magic. Malachar's shadowy form hovered protectively. The lieutenant's mask turned toward Raiskin, and beneath it, a glint of something familiar, a kinship or perhaps a shared legacy. "Ask what you must. I will not hide from your anger. But know this, your journey was shaped for a purpose, and you still have a choice in what comes next." The lieutenant regarded Raiskin in silence for a long moment, then reached up and removed the silver mask with a slow, deliberate motion. Beneath it was a face both unfamiliar and hauntingly reminiscent of Raiskin's own, a woman in her middle years, her eyes a striking shade of storm gray, with the same angular cheekbones and determined jaw. There was a streak of silver in her dark hair, and an echo of sorrow in her expression that made Raiskin's heart lurch. She spoke softly, no longer disguising her voice. "My name is Elira Durander. I am your kin, your great aunt, though the Academy's records would tell you otherwise. I was marked by shadow before you were born, chosen to bear the pain in silence so that our family might endure. When the Academy sought to erase the wounds of the past, I remained, guiding from the shadows, ensuring the truth survived." Raiskin found his breath caught in his throat. The ancestral sigil, the whispered warnings, the sense of being watched, all traced back to her. Randall's eyes widened in recognition, while Malachar bowed his spectral head in solemn respect. Illyra continued, "I shielded you as best I could, guiding your path so you would not fall as I once did. But you surpassed me, Raiskin. You embrace not just the pain, but the hope. That is why you're here, and why the Academy's fate rests in your hands." The chamber seemed to grow lighter, the oppressive gloom easing as the truth settled. Raiskin realized the web that bound him was not only of darkness, but of sacrifice and love. The lieutenant, his great aunt, waited mask in hand for his response. Alira's gaze flickered with regret, but also a steely resolve. Secrecy was not just my choice, Raiskin. It was demanded by the Academy and by our family traditions. When I first uncovered the shadow's true reach, I pleaded for help. The elders, terrified of scandal and pain, insisted silence was the only shield. The Academy, obsessed with appearances, threatened to erase any record of my warning. To speak openly would have meant exile, or worse, the shadow's curse falling on those I loved. She set the mask gently atop the battered chest, her voice trembling. I watched as others were lost students, teachers, even kin. Each time I tried to intervene, the web tightened. I knew Blackstaff's wounds could not be mended by a single voice. I chose to become the lieutenant, to work from the shadows, so I could at least soften the blows fate dealt you, and ensure someone survived to confront the truth when the time was right. Raiskin felt a surge of understanding mingled with sorrow. Randall stepped forward, staff lowered. You risked everything to preserve hope, Alira, but now the Academy's legacy of silence is broken. We must honor your sacrifice, and Raiskin's, by forging a new path. Malachur's spectral presence shimmered with a strange warmth. Alira looked to Raiskin, her eyes shining. I failed to save myself, but I would not let the curse claim you. You are free, Raiskin. What will you do with the truth I could only shield? Malachar's spectral form flickered, the shadow-stained scholar now luminous with a gentle, otherworldly light. His voice felt both distant and itchingly close. You have pierced the veil, Raiskin. The greatest peril is not the darkness itself, but the Academy's ancient fear of facing it. Now that the truth is spoken, you must help others name their wounds. So memory binds, not curses. He drifted toward Alira, bowing his head in respect, then met Raiskin's eyes. Remembrance, not denial, is your greatest weapon. Gather those who suffered in silence, students, teachers, even the forgotten. Let them speak. Only together can you remake what was broken. But move swiftly. The network of artifacts still festers, and the sorrow it feeds may yet lash out in desperation. Randall stepped closer, his staff's black crystal glowing with shared resolve. If Malachar is right, the Academy's redemption begins tonight. Raiskin, will you lead us in a rite of remembrance, or will you choose another path? Alira's hand found Raiskin's shoulder, warm, steady, and real. For the first time, the burden of shadow felt lighter, shared among those who understood. The moment hung between them, heavy with possibility and the promise of healing. Alira met Raiskin's demand with a grave nod. The network's heart is here, beneath the Academy, but its roots spread into every vault and forgotten corridor. I mapped its nodes, each artifact, each ledger mark, over decades in secrecy, and I know how to disrupt them. She drew a folded parchment from within her cloak, its surface webbed with sigils and crimson ink, a map of the Academy's shadowed arteries. Randall studied the parchment, then looked to Raiskin. With this, we can strike at every anchor before the network senses our intent. But we'll need the cooperation of those still haunted by the artifacts. Their pain is what fuels the curse. Malachar's form shimmered, his voice gentle but insistent. Gather them, let them see what has been hidden. Invite them to stand with you in the Hall of Founders, where the Academy's oldest wounds lie open. Only together, with truth spoken and sorrow witnessed, can you break the pattern. Alira placed the map in Raiskin's hands, her own trembling slightly. This is the sum of my years in shadow. I trust you, Raiskin. Lead us. Bring those harmed by the artifacts into the light. Tonight we end this not alone, but with every voice the curse tried to silence. The Hall of Founders echoed with footsteps as Raiskin moved swiftly, Moranal and Tavern close behind. Lanterns flickered along darkened stone, illuminating the faces of students and teachers summoned by Raiskin's call. Some pale with fear, others burning with hope. Alara and Randall worked side by side, a stranger gently guiding the hesitant and the wounded into the circle forming at the chamber's center. Raiskin unrolled Ellora's map atop the ancient plinth, its lines glowing faintly in response to the gathered magic and memory. He raised his voice, steady despite the tremor in his hands. We have all suffered alone for too long. Tonight the truth will be spoken, and the curse broken, not by silence, but by remembrance. Whispers rippled through the crowd as the map's sigils shimmered, each note resonating with the pain and stories held within those present. Malachar's spirit hovered above the assembly, his presence a gentle anchor as Raiskin beckoned those marked by the artifacts to step forward. One by one, students, professors, and even staff revealed hidden scars and painful memories, their words weaving a tapestry of grief and longing. As each confession was spoken, the corresponding node on the map began to fade, the shadow receding with every truth brought to light. Randall's staff glowed brighter, his voice joining Raiskin's. Let your sorrow be known. Only then can we heal. Only then can we be free. The hall vibrated with the power of shared memory, and Raiskin felt, for the first time, the curse's grip begin to loosen not just from himself, but from the academy itself. Alira stepped forward, her face pale but resolute, as every eye in the Hall of Founders settled on her. She began, voice echoing beneath the arched stone. The artifact network was not born of malice but of fear. Decades ago, after the first shadow incursion, the Academy's elders sought to contain sorrow, to bind every painful memory, every exile, into enchanted objects hidden in the darkest vaults. I was a young apprentice then. I pleaded with them to remember openly, to let wounds heal in the sun, not fester in the dark. But they refused. She unfastened her cloak, revealing a sigil-stitched sash across her chest, a mark of those who bore witness. When they sealed the first anchor, I swore to map every new wound, to leave a trail for someone braver to follow. I watched as names were erased, as students and professors faded into ghosts among us. The network grew, fed by every silence, every secret. I tried to intervene, to free some, but my efforts only drove the curse deeper. Her gaze fell on Raiskin, then swept over the crowd. I guided you because I saw my own failure mirrored in your pain. You were meant to be the one who could carry memory without being consumed. The Academy's hope lies not in locking sorrow away, but in facing it together. As Ellora's words wove into the ritual, the map's lines pulsed brightly, then faded at the oldest anchor. A hush fell. The crowd sensed the truth. The curse's roots were tangled with the Academy's own history, and only shared remembrance could bring healing. Raiskin's voice rang clear through the hall, carrying the weight of forgiveness and the hope of unity. We do not blame you, Alira. You showed us the cost of silence and the courage to break it. Let all who have suffered speak, and let all who have hidden listen. Tonight, we are one story, not divided by shame or fear. A ripple moved through the assembly as more voices joined the circle. An older professor spoke of a lost apprentice. A student revealed the burden of a cursed Harloom, and even a janitor, trembling, whispered the names of friends turned to wraiths. As each truth was spoken, the map's anchors pulsed and faded, the oppressive shadow receding further. Morano stepped forward, her illusions weaving gentle visions of each memory. Faces, places, moments of joy and sorrow, so none would be lost to darkness again. Alira's eyes shimmered with tears as she clasped Raiskin's hand. Rondel's staff flared with light, and Malakar's spirit bowed his head, a faint smile crossing his spectral features. The hall filled with a sense of release, a collective breath as the Academy's oldest wounds began to heal in the open air of shared remembrance. But amid the catharsis, Raiskin felt a subtle tug at the edge of his senses. The map's last node glowed with stubborn, lingering shadow, deeper, older, resisting the ritual's light. The lieutenant's story was nearly complete, but one secret, one final anchor, remained. All eyes turned to Raiskin, awaiting his lead as the final trial revealed itself. Malacher's spectral form shimmered at the heart of the hall, his eyes glowing with ancient sorrow and wisdom. He lifted a translucent hand toward the final, stubborn node on Alira's map. This anchor, he intoned, was forged not by a single hand, but by the union of all those too frightened to remember. It is the wound at the very heart of the Academy, the day memory itself was declared an enemy. The chamber dimmed as a wave of shadow rippled from the map's last node, coiling around the gathered assembly. Within the gloom, faint visions flickered. Professors gathered in secret, binding away grief behind sealed doors, students' names scratched from records. A young apprentice, Alira, silently witnessing as hope was traded for silence. The memory was not just Alira's nor Malachar's, but the collective pain of the Academy itself. Raiskin felt the shadows pull, cold and heavy, pressing at the edges of his mind. Yet as Malachar's voice guided him, he saw not only pain, but the chance for transformation. Only by naming this wound together can it heal. Malachar whispered, "You must lead them, Raiskin. Speak the name of the day the Academy chose to forget, and let all voices answer." The assembly's eyes fixed on Raiskin. The moment trembled on the edge of history. The final anchor awaited a name, and Raiskin alone could call it forth, or let the silence endure forever. Malachar's hand swept outward, and the shadows deepened, swirling into a tapestry of memory that enveloped the Hall of Founders. The air grew heavy as each person, professors, students, staff, felt the weight of centuries-old grief settle upon them. Images bled into view. The day the Academy's elders, cloaked and grim, gathered in secret, their faces strained as they resolved to bind sorrow and exile memory itself. Alira, younger and desperate, pleaded at the edge of the circle, but was silenced with a glance and a warning gesture. The vision intensified, and Raiskin felt the shadow pulse through his veins, cold and searching. The pain was collective, shame, regret, and loneliness echoing from every soul present. Yet as Malachar guided him, Raiskin found his own voice joined by many others. "We remember," he whispered, and the assembly echoed, louder each time. "We remember." The blackened node on the map began to crack, threads of shadow splitting as names, long lost and forbidden, rose unbidden to the surface. The assembled crowd began calling them out, one after another, until the chamber reverberated with remembrance. Light seeped into the heart of the shadow, and Malakar's voice rang with hope. This is the day memory returns. The curse cannot stand before unity. As the vision faded, the last anchor shattered, flooding the hall with gentle radiance. Raiskin staggered, supported by Maranel and Alira. The final secret had been faced. Together, the lieutenant's lair, once a place of hidden wounds, was now a sanctuary of truth and healing. Raiskin slipped away from the crowd, the echoes of remembrance still reverberating through the hall. He found Malacher's spirit waiting in a quiet alcove. The spectral scholars formed more serene than ever. Shadows and pale light mingled around them, muffling the distant voices of the assembly. Raiskin's heart pounded, heavy with both relief and uncertainty. "We've faced the past," he said quietly. "But what must I do now to keep the Academy safe?" Malachar regarded him with knowing eyes. "You have opened the wound to the light, Raiskin. But healing is not a single act. It is a tradition that must be tended. The Academy must remember not only its pain, but also its courage in facing it. You must lead them in forging a new rite, not of binding, but of sharing. Remembrance must become the heart of your magic, and of theirs." A distant tremor, a lingering presence, flickered in the shadows. Malachar's gaze sharpened. "There is one more thing, the legacy within you. And within Alira is not a curse, but a gift. The shadow magic you carry can heal as well as harm, if it is wielded openly, with others beside you. Do not hide it away or bear it alone. That is how the old cycle began." Raiskin nodded, understanding settling deep in his bones. The lieutenant's lair was no longer a prison of secrets, but a foundation for something new. As he turned to return to the hall, the future shimmered before him, uncertain, but for the first time truly his to shape. Raiskin returned to the Hall of Founders, his steps echoing as he crossed the threshold. The crowd, professors and students alike, turned toward him, their faces still marked by the emotion of the rite. With deliberate calm, Raiskin raised his hands. Shadows gathered, swirling about his fingers. But this time there was no fear in his heart. Instead, he let the memory of the Academy's pain flow through him, and with it, the hope they had just forged together. He spoke aloud, the words clear and steady. "This is the magic we feared. It is not darkness alone. It is remembrance, and the courage to share it. I choose to wield it openly, not as a weapon, but as a bond." The shadow magic blossomed above his palms, taking the shape of flickering faces. Lost students, forgotten friends, each one illuminated by a gentle inner light. The crowd gasped, but no one recoiled. Instead, many stepped forward, tears bright in their eyes. Malachar's voice, now gentle and free of pain, resonated through Raiskin. "Let all see that shadow may heal, when wielded without shame." The spectral faces drifted among the assembly, each whispering a name or memory. Where they passed, old wounds eased, and the air grew lighter. Raiskin felt Malakar's presence guiding him, yet for the first time he sensed no threat of losing himself. But as the last memory faded, a cold certainty pressed at the edge of Raiskin's awareness. Malachar's power was not entirely gone, and as long as Raiskin carried it so openly, those who still feared the shadow would soon turn against him. For the sake of his friends and the fragile peace, he realized he might have to leave before suspicion curdled into accusation. Raiskin's voice rang out across the hall, carrying an H that silenced all other murmurs. For the sake of those who fear the shadow still within me, and to protect my friends from the cost of old wounds, I will leave Blackstaff Academy. This is my choice, and my promise to you allow no more secrets, no more hiding in shame. A stunned hush rippled through the assembly. Myrnal's eyes brimmed with tears as she broke from the crowd, clutching Raiskin's hand. Tavern stood by her side, face pale but resolute. Alira watched from the back, her expression stricken with both pride and sorrow. Malachar's presence, still palpable within Raiskin, seemed to guide his next words, echoing through him to reach even the hardest hearts. The legacy of shadow is not mine alone. Let remembrance be your shield now, not fear. Stand with one another, as I can no longer stand with you. A few in the crowd nodded in understanding, but others looked away, relieved perhaps, or simply overwhelmed. Raiskin felt the first chill of true solitude, yet also a strange peace. He cast one last, lingering look at his friends. Myrnal squeezed his hand desperately, her lips forming silent protests and pleas for him to stay. Malachar's spirit, gentle but insistent, pressed upon Raiskin's mindy. If you truly wish to protect them, you must go now, before suspicion turns to violence. With a deep breath, Raiskin turned from the hall, shadows curling gently about his feet, and began to walk toward the dawn-lit threshold. The world outside beckoned, uncertain, dangerous, but free from the legacy of hiding. Behind him, the Academy's wounds had been named and faced. Ahead, the true test of his resolve awaited. Raiskin stepped into the dawn-chilled courtyard, the doors of Blackstaff Academy closing behind him with a final, echoing thud. The city beyond was waking, thin ribbons of fog winding between silent towers, the distant clang of a bell marking the hour. He drew his cloak tighter, the silver family locket heavy against his chest, and let Malachar's presence guide his steps into the labyrinthine streets. As he made his way through shadowed alleys, Malachar's voice grew sharper, no longer gentle but urgent. There are eyes watching, Raiskin. Not all are relieved by your departure. Some fear what you carry, and some wish to claim it. You must go where even your memory cannot be easily followed. A sudden movement flickered at the edge of Raiskin's vision. A robed figure, face obscured, lingered near a crumbling fountain. He sensed magical scrutiny, a probing for his aura. Instinctively, he wrapped himself in shadow, not to hide but to transform his presence. Blending remembrance and hope as Malachar had taught, the figure faltered, uncertain, then vanished into the mist. Raiskin pressed onward, heart pounding, every footstep a farewell to the life he'd known. He realized, with a pang, that this flight was not just for his friends' safety, but a beginning. An uncharted road where he must learn to wield his legacy for himself. At the city's edge, as the sun broke through the haze, he paused and whispered a silent promise to Myrnal and all he left behind. I will return, not as a curse, but as hope reborn. Raiskin moved swiftly along the narrow woodland path, the city's noise fading behind him as towering oaks and ancient yews closed in overhead. The dawn light filtered through mist, dappling the undergrowth in shifting silvers and greens. Each step away from Waterdeep felt both like a loss and a hard-won freedom. Malachar's presence, no longer intrusive, now felt like a pulse beneath Raiskin's skin, a guide rather than a jailer. As he entered the heart of the forest, the air thickened with old magic. Shadows danced between mossy roots, and faint chimes, elven wards, echoed in the distance, warning away the uninvited. Raiskin paused, remembering Nithal's teachings, to announce himself not only as a supplicant, but as one bearing pain honestly. He knelt at the base of a great tree, touching the locket at his throat, and spoke softly in Elvish, "I seek counsel and sanctuary, and come with memory, not malice." The forest fell silent for a heartbeat, then a shape emerged from the mists between the trunks, a tall, androgynous elf cloaked in muted green, a bow slung across their back. Nithal stepped forward, eyes wary, but softened by recognition. "You have returned, Raiskin Durander. Few who bear shadow walk openly into these woods again." Malachar's voice rose in Raiskin's mind, stronger than before, yet not entirely his own. "You must warn them, Raiskin. The Shadow's legacy is not yet done. Speak for me, for yourself, before your path leads you further from all you love." Raiskin took a trebling breath, realizing that this meeting was not just for his sake, but for the shadow within him, and for the fragile hope he still carried. Raiskin met Nithal's steady gaze, letting the hush of the forest settle around them like a shroud. "I carry more than sorrow," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Malachar's legacy was never just a curse. It was an inheritance of every pain the Academy refused to name. I fled because that shadow grew hungry for my friends, and I could not bear to see them pay the price for wounds they did not cause." He unclasped the locket, letting the faint sigil catch the dawn. "This binds me not only to my own family's grief, but to the first ritual of remembrance, the one Alira Durander began and the Academy tried to erase. Malachar speaks through me, so his story, and the names of the lost, will not be forgotten again." Nithal's expression shifted from suspicion to solemn understanding. "You come not as a vessel, but as a herald. Speak, then. Let the shadow be named in these woods, that its hunger might be stilled." Malachar's voice resonated, not only in Raiskin's mind, but in the air itself, a low, sorrowful timbreg. "The shadow thrives where pain is hidden and memory is silenced. If you will listen, I will show how even the deepest wounds can become a bond, not a chain." The forest seemed to draw closer, ancient trees leaning in to bear witness as Raiskin prepared to reveal everything, the truth of his flight, the dangers still lurking, and the fragile hope that unity and remembrance could offer salvation. Raiskin opened himself to Malachar's presence, feeling the ancient spirit's sorrow and wisdom well within him. The air thickened, the world narrowing to the hush beneath the trees. When he spoke, his voice was layered. His own mingled with Malachar's, deeper and resonant, echoing through the glade. "Elves of these woods, and Nithal, hear me as once you heard the Watcher's plea. I was born of memory, twisted by pain, but it was silence that made me monstrous. Where sorrow is hidden, the shadow breeds. Where wounds are named, healing begins. Raiskin's flight is not a betrayal, but a gifting. He carries the legacy you once sheltered, and the hope that remembrance can redeem what was broken." Nithal bowed their head, and from the undergrowth other elves emerged, silent, somber, some bearing old scars, some with tears in their eyes. The spell of secrecy was broken. The forest itself seemed to breathe easier, vibrant with the power of named grief. Malakar's words, spoken through Raiskin, lingered. "Do not forget the lost, nor those who bear sorrow for the sake of others. Let this be a place where pain is honored, not denied." As the echoes faded, Raiskin felt the shadow's grip loosen, replaced by a fragile but genuine peace. The elves looked to him now not with suspicion, but with respect, and perhaps a little fear. Nithal stepped forward and offered a silver leaf token. "You are welcome here, Raiskin, but what you carry will draw others. Danger, hope, and the past itself. Will you stay and teach us, or move onward to bear this truth elsewhere?" Nithal studied Raiskin for a long moment, then gestured for him to walk deeper into the glade. "The shadow within you is both shield and beacon. To travel safely, you must do as you have done Hirag, speak plainly of your burden. There are those beyond these woods who hunt the shadow bearer. Some for vengeance, some for their own wounds. Trust those who will share their pain in return." They pressed the silver, leafed token into Raiskin's palm. "This will mark you as a friend of the woods. The token glows in the presence of true remembrance. Should you be hunted, find the oldest tree in any forest, place this at its roots, and speak your sorrow. Sanctuary will answer if you are honest, but you must move quickly. Rumors spread, others seek you, and not all are as forgiving." The gathered elves stepped back, forming a silent corridor between the trees. Malachur's presence felt quieter now, more an undercurrent than a storm. Raiskin bowed in gratitude, feeling a bittersweet ache. He was welcome, but could not linger. The time had come to decide to seek out his companions to warn them. A travel onward to unravel Malachar's network, or remain here and teach remembrance to the elves. Nithal's final words hung in the mist. "The world beyond needs what you carry, but should you ever lose hope, remember. Memory shared is sorrow halved. Go with courage, Raiskin Durander." Raiskin slipped through the twilight woods, the silver leaf token pressed tightly in his palm. Each step away from Elven Sanctuary was a step deeper into uncertainty, yet his mind burned with purpose. Malachar's presence was a gentle whisper now, more guide than master, as Raiskin followed the trail of rumors. Haunted villages, whispered sightings of a shadow bearer, to be a stranger, and markets where cursed artifacts changed hands under the cover of night. As dusk thickened, Raiskin emerged onto a muddy road, the silhouettes of distant farmsteads barely visible through the gathering mist. Ahead, a crossroads tavern glowed with lantern light. He paused, heart pounding, knowing that every stop might bring pursuers or allies, or both. He considered his next move: seek news of his companions, question travelers about the artifact network, or vanish into the wildlands until the danger passed. A lone traveler approached from the east, a hooded figure, human by the gait, but wary, glancing back over their shoulder. As they drew near, Raiskin caught a glimpse of a familiar badging, the crest of Blackstaff Academy, half hidden by mud. The traveler's eyes widened in shock upon seeing Raiskin. "You, Raiskin Durander. They said you'd fled into the wilds. There are those searching for you, some desperate to help, others not so kind. Will you come with me? There's news you must hear." The crossroads hummed with possibility and peril. Raiskin weighed the risk of trust against the cost of isolation, knowing that every decision would shape not just his fate, but the future of the Academy and all who bore the mark of shadow. Ranger Raiskin melted into the darkness beyond the crossroads, careful to keep his steps light on the dew-slick grass. The tavern's laughter and the hooded traveler's anxious calls faded behind him, replaced by the hush of distant fields and the steady thrum of his heartbeat. Each time he glanced over his shoulder, The world seemed to close-ing, a crow's caw sounded like a warning, the wind sighed like a pursuer's breath. He skirted the edge of a fallow field, then slipped into a tangled copse of willow and thorn. The silver-leafed token in his fist pulsed faintly, a reminder of sanctuary, but he dared not use it, not yet. Shadows thickened, and the sense of being watched grew, until he realized it was not just paranoia. Malachar's awareness sharpened, pressing at the edges of his thoughts. "You cannot outrun destiny, Raiskin." The spirit murmured, gentle yet insistent. "You flee for their sake, but your pain must be spoken, or it will find its own voice." A sudden rustle ahead. A cloaked figure, smaller than the traveler, stepped onto the path, lantern hooded against discovery. The outline was familiar Myranal. Her eyes shone with worry in the dim light. "Raiskin! I knew you wouldn't just vanish. We need you. Tavern is hurt. There's word of another anchor stirring." And she hesitated, lowering her voice. "Malachar is reaching out through you. Isn't he?" The choice pressed in Ing to reveal what he carried and risk their fear, to flee once more into the night, or to let Malachar speak truths through his voice. No more running, no more secrets. The crossroads of fate was now, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Raiskin let his breath tremble out, the night air thick with confession as Myranal waited, lantern lowered. "You're right," he whispered. "Malachar is within me, more than a shadow, more than a curse. He wants to speak, to be known. I can't run any more. Not from you, not from any of it." Myranal stepped closer, her eyes shining with the pain of hope and fear entwined. "Then let him speak. I trust you, Raiskin. We all do. But we need to understand." He nodded, and let go. Darkness flickered in his gaze as Malachar's presence welled up, his voice echoing through Raiskin's mouth. "You who follow this boy, hear me. I am Malachar, once a scholar, now a watcher bound by sorrow. I have guided and haunted, but never wished to destroy. The pain you see in Raiskin is the cost of silence, the price of memory denied. You must not fear him. Fear forgetting. It is only in remembrance, in the open charring of wounds, that you are free." The words vibrated in the air, an ancient H made new. Myranal's hand found Raiskin's, her illusion magic shimmering softly, a silent promise of solidarity. In the distance, a shout rang out, Tavern's voice, urgent and afraid. The moment of revelation was over. Raiskin turned, resolve settling into his bones. "I have to go," he said, voice his own again, but layered with Malachar's wisdom. "If I stay, you'll all be in danger. But now you know memory is the key. Don't let them erase me, or any of us." Raiskin slipped deeper into the forest, each step muffled by moss and the hush of midnight. Behind him, Myranal's lantern dimmed to a memory, and the distant shouts faded like echoes of another life. Branches clawed at his cloak, but he pressed on, driven by the need to place distance between himself and those he loved, if only to shield them from what might come. Malachar's voice was a balm and a warning. "You are not alone, even in exile, but the world will hunt what it does not understand. Let memory guide you, not fear." Raiskin paused, drawing a shaky breath. He reached into his pouch, fingers closing around the family locket. Its hidden sigil thrummed faintly, a promise of both legacy and burden. He wondered if his own name, too, would one day become a story whispered in this wood. A chill breeze carried the distant ring of steel. Tavern's defenders, perhaps, or pursuers. Raiskin knelt at the roots of an ancient oak, tracing the runes Nithal had taught him. He pressed the silver-leafed token to the earth, whispering a plea for sanctuary for his friends, for himself, for all who bore the shadow mark. The forest seemed to listen, branches swaying in silent accord. Resolve settling in, Raiskin rose, wrapping shadow and memory around himself. A living ward, he would not let isolation become his tomb. Somewhere ahead, the path forked one way toward the rumored resting place of Malachar, another back toward his companions. For now he walked alone, but not lost, carrying both the sorrow of exile and the fragile hope of redemption. The forest path wound ever deeper, moonlight barely filtering through the tangle of ancient boughs. Raiskin pressed on, guided by the pull of something both dreadful and inevitable. The air grew colder, the scent of moss replaced by a faint, metallic tang. At last, the trees parted, revealing a low mound of earth ringed by weathered standing stones. The tomb whispered of in legends, Malachar's first resting place. A subtle vibration thrummed through the soil as Raiskin approached, the black crystal at his belt resonating in sympathy. Shadows pulled at the foot of the mound, and for a moment, Raiskin's reflection flickered in the stone. Eyes shadowed but resolute, Malachar's voice quieter now, urging, "Here is where pain began, and where it must be named. But you are not here only for me. The Academy's wounds, your own, all converge in this place." He knelt before the largest stone, tracing its faded glyphs. As his fingers brushed a worn rune, memories surged, visions of Malachar's lonely vigil, the faces of the forgotten, and Raiskin's own moments of loss and betrayal. Each memory was a key, unlocking the sorrow woven into the tomb. A pulse of magic rippled outward, and Raiskin sensed the wards of the place respond, expectant, almost welcoming. Behind him, a distant voice, Moranel's, faint but determined, carried on the wind. He hesitated. To proceed meant facing the full weight of history, but to turn back might mean abandoning hope for all who suffered in silence. The crossroads had become a circling memory, pain, and the possibility of redemption, all bound in shadow and moonlight. Raiskin set the locket, its soft silver gleaming in the moonlight, beside the black crystal atop the ancient tomb. His hands trembled as he began the ritual, voice threading together words of his family's legacy and Malachar's ancient sorrow. The artifacts pulsed in response, their magics twining like roots beneath the earth, drawing the pain of centuries into the open night. A surge of memory swept through him. Malachar's final moments as a mortal, the echoing halls of the Academy, the faces of those who were lost and forgotten. Raiskin felt his own grief rise up, no longer something to banish, but to offer. The air thickened, the standing stones flickered with ghostly forms. Students, scholars, and ancestors all bearing witness to this union of pain and hope. The black crystal began to glow, its darkness threaded with silvery light from the locket. Malachar's voice spoke through Raiskin, but this time it was both their voices, woven together. We remember, we forgive, we remain. The ritual's energy washed through the tomb, unraveling the last vestiges of the curse and anchoring Malachar's spirit not as a tormentor, but as a guardian. Raiskin's own shadow felt lighter, his exile transformed from punishment to purpose. As the ritual faded, a hush settled over the clearing. The standing stones gleamed faintly, the artifacts now joined in quiet harmony. Raiskin stood, heart pounding, knowing the true battle was still to come. But for the first time, he carried both his burden and Malachar's blessing. The crossroads had become a sanctuary, and his next step would shape the fate of all who walked in shadow. Raiskin pressed the iron tip of his ritual dagger to the stone, breath held tight as he etched the first stroke of his name. The ancient surface resisted, then yielded, each letter drawn with a trembling certainty Raiskin. Beside his, he carved the glyphs of Malachar, letters remembered from visions and whispered by the spirit himself. Magic bled from the rock, silver and shadow mingling in the carved names, luminous as moonlit water. As the final curve was set, the ground hummed and a ring of spectral light flared, connecting the standing stones in a radiant circuit. The air shimmered with the forms of the watching witnesses. Ghostly students, lost professors, and ancestors, all silent, their eyes meeting Raiskin's in solemn approval. Malachar's presence filled the clearing, no longer a whisper but a deep, steady harmony. Guardian, not jailer. The pact was sealed. Raiskin felt his own sorrow anchor into the land, mixing with Malachar's, no longer burden but bond. At his feet, the locket and black crystal pulsed in time, their magics harmonized. The tomb responded, the ancient wards shifting. A hidden seam in the earth parting, just enough to reveal a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. A passage, now open, to whatever lay beneath. Above, the wind picked up and carried a distant voice. Mirinal's, stronger now, threading hope through the chill. The choice was clear. Descend and finish what he had begun, or return to those calling his name, risking what the tomb's opening might unleash. The next step would define not only Raiskin's fate, but the legacy of memory and shadow for generations to come. The spiral staircase descended into a chill that felt ancient, untouched by living breath for centuries. Raiskin's footsteps echoed on stones slick with condensation, his only light the mingled pulsing of the black crystal and his family locket, now fused in purpose. Shadows danced across carvings in the walls, scenes of scholars at vigil, of sorrowful partings and forgotten names. Each image tugged at the edges of his mind, a silent testament to the cost of memory denied. At the base of the stairs, a circular chamber unfolded, ringed by pillars etched with runes that shimmered between silver and onyx. The air was thick, almost liquid with magical resonance. In the center stood an ancient stone bier, upon which rested a faded shroud sewn with sigils of both warding and welcome. Above it, incorporeal forms, swirled Malachar's memory, but also echoes of Raiskin's ancestors, all watching, all waiting. As Raiskin stepped forward, the locket and crystal lifted from his hands, drifting to hover above the bier. The spectral chorus grew louder, not in menace, but in invitation. The runes on the pillars flared to life, and a current of magic swept through Raiskin, drawing out his deepest fears. Of being consumed. Of failing those he loved, of never returning from the darkness. Yet beneath the fear was the steady presence of Malachar, now a guide rather than a captor, urging him to speak the truth of his journey for all to hear. The first phase of the ritual had begun. Raiskin realized that to awaken the guardian spirit, and protect the world from Shadow's return, he must lay bare the full truth of memory, sorrow, and hope, not only for himself, but for all those watching in the living and spirit world alike. Raiskin stood before the bier, voice trembling as he began. My greatest failure was not a single spell gone wrong or a friend I could not save. It was the years I spent believing I had to bear my pain alone. That if I spoke my sorrow, I would be cast out, and those I loved would suffer for knowing me. I watched friendships wither, Hope turned to bitterness, and I let the shadow inside me grow, because I feared what the truth would cost. The chamber seemed to draw closer, the spectral audience leaning in, faces etched with their own regrets, the silent witnesses of centuries. The locket and black crystal pulsed in time with Raiskin's words, magic weaving sorrow into the air. Malachar's presence steadied him, and Raiskin pressed on. I failed when I shut out those who tried to help, when I let pride and fear become my only companions. That is the wound I offer now, not to be banished, but to be remembered, so no one else need face the darkness alone. As his confession echoed through the tomb, the runes on the pillars flared brighter, the sorrow in the air transforming. Less a weight, more a current of understanding and shared pain. The incorporeal forms nodded, their outlines sharpening as if granted new strength by his honesty. The shroud on the bier stirred, the first sign that the ritual was awakening something within. A voice, gentle but insistent, resounded in both Raiskin's mind and aloud. Will you accept the burden of memory for all those who cannot speak? Will you let your heart be the vessel for both hope and grief? The choice loomed. Embrace the role of guardian, or call for his friends above to share the burden, risking the ritual's balance. Raiskin drew a ragged breath, feeling the weight of the tomb settle on his shoulders as he answered the voice. I accept. I will carry the memories of all those who cannot speak, and hold their sorrow and hope as my own. The chamber trembled, the pillars' runes flaring with a brilliance that bordered on pain. The black crystal and locket fused midair, spinning faster and faster until they became a single orb of swirling shadow and light, then descended to rest against Raiskin's chest, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Spectral figures melted into the runes, their memories flowing into Raiskin. Centuries of anguish and joy, exile and reunion, raced through his mind, a flood threatening to tear him apart. Yet, with Malachar's steady presence anchoring him, he found himself able to bear it. The pain was immense, but it was no longer isolating. It became a chorus, a living testament to all who had suffered and endured. As the ritual's energies peaked, the shroud on the bier lifted, revealing the faint form of Malachar, the scholar, not the monster, rising before Raiskin. Malachar's eyes brimmed with gratitude and sorrow. You have done what I could not. But even a vessel must be filled with care, lest it shatter. Will you open the tomb and let your companions witness this rebirth, or will you seal this power within forever alone? Choose now, for the ritual cannot be undone. A faint echo of Mirinal's voice carried down the stairwell, laced with fear and hope. The spectral witnesses waited, the fate of memory, and Raiskin's soul, hanging on his next decision. The stone door of the tomb shuddered as Raiskin extended his will, sealing it with a whisper of sorrow and gratitude. Runes snaked across its surface, locking the chamber in a web of memory and shadow that would admit no one. Not Miranal, not Tavern, not even the echoes of the academy above. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the pulse of the fused crystal locket against his heart. Malachar's form hovered before him, more defined now, a scholar's face lined with centuries of regret and fleeting hope. You have chosen solitude for their sake, Malachar murmured, his voice heavy as velvet. But even the strongest vessel will crack if left untended. Remember, our guardianship is not exile, unless you make it so. As the ritual's current settled, Raiskin felt the flood of memories begin to order themselves names of the lost, faces of those who suffered in silence, their stories woven into his own soul. He was no longer simply Raiskin, he was the living archive of the Academy's grief and love. The crystal locket glowed with a soft, persistent light, a beacon for the spirits within, and a warning to all who might seek to disturb the tomb. Outside the sealed door, distant voices echoed. Morannel's, Tavron's, others calling his name. But here, in the heart of the ancient tomb, Raiskin stood alone. The first phase of the resurrection ritual complete. The final choice remained to hold this burden forever, or to risk opening the way for others to share in the healing, no matter the cost. Kneeling before the bier, Raiskin drew the crystal locket into his palm and pressed it to the runic floor. Shadows and silvery light coiled around his fingers as he began tracing the ancient sigils that Malachar once used. The tomb's air thickened, charged with a heavy, throbbing resonance that made his bones ache. Each line of the ritual demanded a memory, a name, a face, a loss, and Raiskin gave them willingly, letting the chorus of voices within rise and blend with his own. Malachar hovered nearby, his scholar's robes fluttering in the ethereal current. "Let the vessel shape the gate," Malachar intoned, his voice merging with Raiskin's. The runes pulsed brighter, and a subtle rift shimmered above the bier, a threshold between worlds, neither wholly living nor dead. Raiskin felt the pressure of countless spirits pressing close, drawn to the promise of remembrance and release. The ritual's next phase becoming the act of willing resurrection. Raiskin could pour his own essence, his hope, his love, his pain, into the threshold, risking his soul for Malachar's rebirth as a guardian. Or he could attempt to stabilize the rift, anchoring it with the power of the fused artifact alone, keeping himself insulated, but risking an incomplete transformation. He paused, sensing a distant, desperate pounding on the sealed stone above. Miranel's voice, Tavron's strength, their love finding cracks in his solitude. The ritual's energies swirled, poised for the final shaping. The time to choose was now. A surge of power and longing twisted through Raiskin as he poured his soul into the rift. Every memory, his mother's smile, Lorelia's promise, Miranel's laughter, Tavron's fierce loyalty, was drawn from him and braided with the centuries-old sorrow echoing in the chamber. The crystal locket pulsed so brightly it obscured the runes, and Raiskin's vision blurred with tears, not just his own, but those of all who had ever longed to be remembered. Malachar's form began to shift, growing more solid, more human, as the rift responded to Raiskin's offering. The tomb filled with music, a symphony of voices, some ancient and trembling, others young and bright. Malachar reached out, his scholar's hand overlapping Raiskin's, and together they shaped the ritual's heart. The guardian spirit's presence was no longer cold, but warm, suffused with gratitude and purpose. The threshold stabilized, and at its center appeared a gate of woven shadow and light, an opening neither wholly of the living nor the dead, but a bridge. Raiskin's strength faltered, the burden nearly too much, but Malachar's voice steadied him. "You are not alone. Let them in. Let memory become sanctuary, not a prison." From above, the pounding grew louder, the seal began to glow. Cracks of golden light spidering across its surface. The ritual's energy demanded a choice. Open the way for his friends to witness, risking all they carried, or keep the sanctuary closed, ensuring their safety, but denying the healing unity the ritual promised. Raiskin pressed his hand to the rune-glowing floor, the crystal locket's light now blinding in the hush of the tomb. The swirling energies pressed tighter. Demanding more than memory, they sought the vulnerable core of his being. Alone, he steadied himself, letting every ache, every triumph, every fear and love echo through the ritual's current. The threshold shimmered in response, stabilizing not with the force of many, but the singular, a burning clarity of his sacrifice. Malachar's presence, now almost indistinguishable from his own, stood sentinel at the bridge. The guardian's voice was gentle, regretful. You give everything, Raiskin, but in sealing the gate with only your soul, you forfeit the chance for others to witness, to share the burden. The Academy's healing may begin here, but its hope will rest on your memory alone. A deep tremor coursed through the tomb as the ritual reached its culmination. The gate of woven light and shadow solidified, and a surge of restorative energy swept outward, banishing the lingering curses, soothing the restless spirits, and anchoring Malachar's transformed spirit as a benevolent warden. Raiskin felt his strength ebb, the cost of solitude weighing heavy. But the pain was laced with purpose, the wounds of the past were bound into a living ward, one that would endure as long as his memory did. Above, the pounding and cries faded, replaced by a hush that felt both mournful and grateful. Raiskin realized the first phase was finished. The tomb was now a sanctuary, its secrets preserved within him. The world waited outside, uncertain what would emerge from the silence. The next choice was remain guardian in isolation, attempt to open the sanctuary despite the risk, or call out, inviting his friends to join him in the aftermath. Raiskin's voice, raw and hope-filled, echoed up through the cracks in the tomb's seal. The chamber's hush trembled, and then, answering his call, light spilled through the splintering stone. Miranel's silhouette appeared first, her eyes wide with awe and tears as she reached down, Tavern's steady hand close behind. They crossed the threshold hesitantly, their presence met by a palpable, a shimmering warmth that radiated from the ritual's heart. As their hands joined Raiskin's, the sanctuary's magic shifted. The burden of memory, once crushing and solitary, diffused. Threads of sorrow, hope, and love weaving from each of them into the bridge between worlds. The air sang with a new harmony, the pain of the past transformed by their unity. Malachar's spirit, now radiant and fully formed, bowed to the trio. You have made this more than a ward, he intoned. You have made it a promise. That memory, once shared, becomes a source of strength. A wave of relief and release swept through the tomb. The runes on the floor faded to a gentle glow, the oppressive shadows receding. For a moment, all three friends stood together at the threshold, no longer alone, but bound by their willingness to bear each other's pain. The Academy's wounds, and Raiskin's own, had found their first true balm. But outside, the world was already stirring. The future of the Academy, and Raiskin's place in it, would depend on what they chose to reveal, whom they chose to trust, and how they would carry the sanctuary's promise into the light of day. Raiskin drew a trembling breath and unclasped his family locket from around his neck, the black crystal fused at its heart, glowing with a gentle, inner radiance. He knelt at the foot of Malachar's tomb, placing the locket upon a raised stone shaped like an open book, an altar of memory carved long ago. Let this be our sign, he whispered, voice steadying, not just of what we endured, but of what we hope to become. Miranelle added her own token, a silver-threaded charm shaped like a tiny, smiling mask. Her first successful illusion, a memento of joy reclaimed from loss. Tavern, with a solemn nod, laid down his battered warding amulet. The leather strap frayed, but the runes still strong. The three tokens formed a triangle around the altar, their energies mingling, binding the sanctuary with their vow. As the items settled, a ripple of golden light flowed outward, weaving the tokens' memories into the fabric of the tomb. Malachar's spirit, now luminous and serene, bowed deeply, his gratitude a warmth in their hearts. The chamber felt lighter, the air sweet with possibility, a promise that sorrow need not be hidden, nor hope left unspoken. Raiskin stood, hands joined with his friends, and turned toward the ascending passage. At the threshold he paused, casting one last look at the altar and the guardian spirit. Whatever shadows lingered above, they would face them together, bearing the truth of the tomb and the hope they had forged below. The passage upward was steep and narrow, the air growing less heavy with every step. As Raiskin, Miranelle, and Tavern emerged into the wan dawn filtering through fractured stone, the Academy's grounds spread before them. Silent, expectant, as if holding its breath. The tomb's concealed entrance shimmered faintly behind them, a secret now etched into the earth and into their hearts. Faculty and students were gathering beyond the old mausoleum, drawn by rumors of magic and the vanishing shadows. Archmage Rondel stood at their head, staff in hand, his expression wary but searching. As the trio stepped into the open, the hush fractured, gasps and uncertain murmurs rippling through the crowd at the sight of Raiskin, transformed yet unmistakably himself, flanked by steadfast friends. Raiskin raised a hand, summoning the courage kindled in the tomb. "We have made a sanctuary below," he declared, his voice clear and carrying. "A place where memory and sorrow become strength, not a curse. Malachar is no longer a monster bound by fear, but a guardian born of remembrance. We offer this truth to the Academy, not to hide, but to heal." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then Miranelle and Tavern stepped forward, echoing Raiskin's words and laying bare their tokens of hope. The crowd's mood shifted, skepticism mingling with awe. Randall's eyes glimmered, and he gestured for the trio to approach, inviting them to share the full story, to begin the Academy's reckoning with its past. The moment of truth had come. Raiskin stood before the gathered Academy, the morning sun glinting off shattered mausoleum stones and the gold in Archmage Randall's staff. His voice, though trembling at first, gained strength as he spoke of the visions that haunted him, the cost of the rituals, the pain and isolation that shadow magic demanded. He did not shy away from his darkest moments, the violence, the fear he had sown among friends, the temptation to let sorrow consume him. Every word was a confession and a plea for understanding. Miranelle and Tavern flanked him, adding their truths, Miranelle's illusions, born of longing for her lost brother. Tavern's terror at nearly losing Raiskin to the shadow, the wounds they all shared, and the hope found in unity. Together, they described the sanctuary, how the tomb below now pulsed with memory, not malice, and how Malachar's spirit had become a guardian, freed by remembrance and forgiveness rather than force. The crowd shifted, some weeping freely, others stunned. Randall's eyes shone with tears he did not hide. "We have lived too long with secrets and silence," the Archmage declared. "Let us bear witness to one another's pain, and let us heal, as Raiskin and his friends have shown. As the first rays of true sunlight broke through the clouds, the Academy's great bell rang out, a signal for gathering, and, on this day, an omen of change. The reckoning had begun, and the way forward depended on whether the truth shared here would be embraced or buried once more. Raiskin's gaze swept the crowd until he spotted a flash of silver, the glint of Lorelai's ring, shining on her hand as she gently nudged her way forward. Her eyes met his, bright with tears and pride, and for a moment the years of separation, fear, and longing seemed to fall away. As she reached him just as the crowd's murmurs grew into cautious applause, slipping her hand into his. The touch was electric, anchoring him in the reality of this new dawn. Without hesitation, Lorelei stepped beside Raiskin, her voice ringing out, "Let us remember not only those we lost, but those who returned. Changed, yes, but whole if we dare to see them." The crowd hushed again, listening as she revealed her own scar-sink, the secrecy, the pain of exile, her fight to remain herself amid the Academy's silence. Her courage lent strength to others, students and professors alike, who began to step forward, sharing memories, confessions, and hopes. Archmage Rundle raised his staff, the black crystal at its tip catching the sun. The sanctuary below stands as our bond, a living memory. From this day, the Academy's pain and love will be spoken and shared. Raiskin squeezed Lorelai's hand and, for the first time, felt the darkness inside him transform, not into a curse, but a wellspring of compassion. The ritual had begun in Malachar's tomb, but its true power was here, in the light. The Academy was no longer a place of secrets. It was at last a home. Descending once more into the hushed gloom of the tomb, Raiskin knelt beside Malachar's resting place, now a sanctum crowned by gentle, shimmering wards. The air was cool, faintly scented with earth and ancient incense. Shadows danced along the walls, and as Raiskin touched the fused locket and black crystal at the altar, a presence gathered Malachar's spirit, neither cold nor menacing, but luminous with sorrow and wisdom. "Guardian," Raiskin whispered, his voice raw. "The Academy stands ready to change. But how do we ensure remembrance is not twisted again? How do we keep sorrow from festering into shadow?" Malachar's form, a scholar in flowing robes, emerged from the twilight. His eyes held the glimmer of centuries' grief, yet his voice was gentle. "You must teach them to gather, not in secrecy, but in ritual. Share pain, honor memory, and let the young name their wounds. A festival of remembrance, woven into the years turning, will anchor what we have begun. And you, Raiskin, must not bear the burden alone. Let others lead, let others speak." A new warmth radiated from the altar, threads of light weaving outward, as if sketching the beginnings of such a ritual in the very stones. Raiskin felt Malachar's blessing settle over him, a promise that even guardians need not be alone. He rose, resolve steeled, ready to return to the surface and guide the Academy's first true festival of remembrance. Raiskin emerged from the tomb's shadowed stair into the Academy's main hall, where Archmage Roundel was surrounded by a circle of students and faculty. The air hummed with cautious hope, the sunlight through stained glass dappling the floor in shifting colors. As the crowd parted for him, Raiskin met Rondel's gaze and spoke with clear conviction. "We must make remembrance a living tradition. Not a hidden burden, but a festival. Each year, All are invited to share the names, the losses, and the hopes that bind us. Let sorrow become our bond, not our curse. Randall's face softened with relief. You have my blessing, Raiskin. Let this be your gift to the Academy. Lead us in this first festival of remembrance. The Archmage's staff thudded on the marble, and an approving murmur swept through the crowd. Mirinal, Tavrin, and Lirali joined Raiskin, each placing a hand on his shoulder. Together, they formed a new circle, one not of secrecy, but of solidarity, with Randall himself stepping into its ring. As the crowd watched, the black crystal on Randall's staff and Raiskin's fused locket resonated with a gentle, luminous pulse. The ancient wards overhead awakened, threads of light unfurling to weave a protective sigil across the hall. For a heartbeat, everyone felt the warmth of memory, painful, yes, but no longer unbearable. The Academy itself seemed to draw breath, shifting from haunted to hallowed. But as Raiskin looked into the faces around him, he sensed a lingering shadow. One last vestige of possession flickering at the edges of his mind. The true battle for his soul was not yet over, and only the strength of this united circle might keep him from being lost to darkness forever. Raiskin stepped into the center of the marble hall, the sunlight painting his features in gold and shadow. The circle of students and faculty waited, breathless, as he raised the fused locket and black crystal to his heart. His voice, trembling at first, found its strength. I was afraid of my own sorrow. I hid it, let it twist into shadow, and lost myself. But today, I offer my memory to you, not as a course, but a bridge. My loneliness, my failures, my hope to belong. The silence deepened as the locket's sigil shone, projecting gentle images, a child reading in a candlelit library, a young man weeping in an empty dormitory, trembling hands reaching for friendship. Magic rippled through the hall, inviting others forward. Mirinal was the first to join him, her illusion magic blooming into a vision of her lost brother and the warmth of her childhood home. Tavrin followed, voice steady, recounting his own brush with despair and the friends who brought him back. One by one, others stepped forward, students, instructors, even Randall, each offering a memory, painful or joyous, to the circle. The black crystal pulsed with every confession, transforming lingering shadows into threads of light. Yet, as the festival of remembrance blossomed, a cold wind swept the hall, a flicker behind Raiskin's eyes, a whisper of Malachar's old hunger, testing the unity of the ritual. Raiskin's vision blurred. He felt the shadow clawing for control, stronger than before, drawn by the outpouring of pain and hope. The true battle for his soul had begun, now waged not in isolation, but before all who loved and feared him. Would their unity be enough to hold him, or would the darkness seize its last chance? Raiskin's grip tightened around the fused locket and black crystal as the shadow surged in his mind, a tidal wave of old grief and new temptation. He gasped, vision swimming. The marble hall and gathered faces flickered, replaced by a phantom world of cold, echoing corridors. Malachar's whisper clawed at his thoughts, urging surrender, let go. It is easier to forget, to drift, to become shadow and silence. But through the fog, a chorus of voices pressed in. Mirinel's gentle encouragement, Tavrin's steady faith, Lirali's whispered promise. Each friend's memory shone like a beacon the night of laughter beneath the stars, the circle of hands during the severance rite, the vows made in the greenhouse. As Raiskin focused on these anchors, the crystal pulsed in time with his heartbeat, the darkness within him quivering. Suddenly, Mirinal's hand closed over his, her voice slicing through the growing chill. "You are not alone, Raiskin. Let us bear it with you." Tavern and Lorelei pressed closer, their presence lending strength. Light blazed from the fused locket, pushing back the shadow like dawn through mist. The hall shimmered, the boundary between memory and reality blurring as everyone's shared pain became a living bulwark against Malakar's possession. For a moment, Raiskin felt himself teetering on the edge, one step from oblivion, one step from hope. The outcome hung in the balance, determined not by his power alone, but by the unity of the friends and the Academy standing beside him. The final test of the soul had begun. Raiskin drew in a shuddering breath, the fused locket and black crystal burning cold in his grasp. He felt the collective weight of his friends' memories pressing against the encroaching tide of shadow. Each story, each pain, each hope a spark woven into the tapestry of his soul. He summoned not just his own recollections, but the living pulse of the festival. Mirinal's brother's laughter, Tavern's words of forgiveness, Lorelia's vow shining like a distant star. The hall glowed brighter, every participant's memory threading through him, forming a bulwark of light. As he reached for the surge of magic, the shadow within him shrieked and writhed. Malakar's ancient sorrow, now desperate, seeking any crack to slip through. Raiskin's voice above the tumult. "You are seen. You are remembered. I will not cast you out, but you will not rule me." The locket flared, the black crystal sang, a chorus of the Academy's pain and healing echoing through time. Shadows peeled away in ribbons, dissolving into gentle motes as each memory was spoken and witnessed by the crowd. Yet, at the heart of the storm, a single ember of darkness remained. Malakar's core despair, the seed that had bound him for generations. Raiskin sensed that to dispel the shadow completely, he would have to confront this kernel, not with force, but with understanding and acceptance. His friends' hands remained on his shoulders, their support unbroken, their faith the only thing keeping him from tumbling back into oblivion. The hall hushed, all eyes fixed on Raiskin. The fate of his soul, and the Academy's future, waited on his next choosing to face Malakar's pain alone, or to trust his friends to share the final burden. Raiskin stepped away from his friends' reassuring hands, the marble floor echoing beneath his boots as he entered the heart of the swirling shadow. The world around him faded, replaced by a vast, moonlit void, cold, endless, and haunted by the echo of old regrets. At its center floated a spectral figuring. Malachar, not monstrous but sorrowful, cloaked in tattered scholar's robes, eyes hollow with centuries of pain. The darkness pressed in, suffocating, as Malachar's voice trembled. "Why do you come alone, Raiskin? Why not flee, as all others did? I was left here, forgotten." The weight of abandonment and despair threatened to crush Raiskin's spirit, every step forward a battle against the seductive pull to let go, to dissolve into the endless night. Yet he pressed on, clutching the locket and crystal, the faint warmth of his friends, faith flickering at the edge of his senses. He knelt before Malakar, not in supplication, but in solidarity. "You are not forgotten," Raiskin whispered, voice steady despite the fear. "Your pain is real, but so is hope. I have carried your sorrow, but it need not be my prison, or yours." The shadow trembled, flickering between rage and longing as Malakar's face twisted with yearning for release. Raiskin reached out, offering both the locket and crystal, abridging memory and sorrow with compassion. The void shuddered. For a heartbeat, it seemed Malachar might lash out, consume Raiskin's soul entirely. But the memory of the friends outside, of unity, of remembrance, stood as a silent shield. The final confrontation had begun. Would Malachar accept the chance for peace? Or would despair claim them both? Raiskin stood tall within the moonlit void, the name burning on his tongue. Malachar, once scholar, now shadow. He spoke the name aloud, voice ringing with courage and compassion. Malachar, I see you, I remember you, not as a curse, but as one who loved, who tried, who suffered. The effect was immediate. Shadows recoiled, the spectral figure before him writhing as if caught between agony and hope. Malachar's tattered robe fluttered with unseen wind, his hollow eyes filling with tears that shimmered like starlight. For a terrifying heartbeat, Raiskin's own spirit threatened to unravel, the ancient sorrow surging through him, trying to replace memory with oblivion. Yet the locket's warmth and the melody of the crystal anchored him, binding his soul to every friend's faith and every shared story. Malachar fell to his knees, voice breaking. You remember my true self. After all these ages, someone cares enough to know my pain. Is there forgiveness? Raiskin felt the shadow's power loosen, the void brightening as his friend's presence pressed in. A chorus of voices from the waking world, names spoken in solidarity, pain honored openly. The course, for the first time, began to dissolve not by force, but by acceptance. Beyond the void, Raiskin sensed the marble hall and his companions, their hands reaching for him in desperate hope. The darkness was retreating, but the final step remained, to offer Malachar a place among the living. Not as a monster, but as memory's guardian. The fate of both souls hung on Raiskin's next act of trust. Raiskin's outstretched hand and trembled in the moonlit void, but he did not waver. Malachar stared at the offered gesture, face etched with centuries of anguish and longing. For an agonizing instant, it seemed the shadow would refuse. Then Malachar reached out, spectral fingers brushing Raiskin's. A surge of memory and feeling crashed through both souls. So Malachar's years of loneliness, the bitter taste of betrayal, the relentless itch for forgiveness. Yet, through Raiskin's touch, the warmth of friendship, hope, and unity seeped in. The void around them shimmered, its oppressive darkness fading as the circle of remembrance took shape. Raiskin's friends appearing in the mist, hands extended, faces shining with acceptance and love. Malachar gasped, light flickering within his spectral eyes. All these years, I sought only to be remembered, not feared. Will you truly share this burden with me? Raiskin nodded, and together they stepped into the circle. The void fractured, shadow and sorrow unraveled, replaced by a radiant web of memories, each thread woven with the names and stories once consigned to darkness. The marble hall of the academy returned, sunlight streaming through stained glass as the last wisps of shadow dissolved. Malachar's form lingered beside Raiskin, no longer monstrous, but transformed, a grateful guardian, welcomed into the living memory of all present. The circle stood unbroken, and the academy's wounds began to heal. Yet a hush lingered. What would become of Raiskin, now forever changed by the bond he had forged between shadow and light? The silence in the marble hall is broken at last by Raiskin's steady voice. Let all present bear witness, he proclaims, his declaration echoing in the high vaulted chamber. Malachar is no longer our curse, but our guardian, keeper of our memory, our pain, and our hope. This day, we begin a new tradition, the Festival of Remembrance. Let sorrow unite us, not divide us. A hush falls as students, professors, and even the most skeptical faculty look to one another, some uncertain, some weeping openly. Miranel steps forward, her illusion magic conjuring gentle images of past students and lost friends, their names written in light upon the air. Tavern places a hand on Raiskin's shoulder, nodding in solemn agreement. Archmage Randall, eyes shining with unshed tears, raises his staff and intones, "We remember, we heal." Malachar's spirit glows with a newfound warmth, no longer a chill wind but a gentle radiance that fills the hall. One by one, those assembled begin to share their stories of loss, regret, and hope, forming a tapestry of remembrance that strengthens the new guardian's bond to the academy. The pain that once fed the shadow now forges a community to be a string, and Raiskin, though forever changed, feels the weight of his burden finally shared. As the first festival of remembrance dawns, sunlight floods the stained glass, casting rainbows across the assembled crowd. The academy is transformed, not just by magic, but by the courage to face its sorrow together. Yet, as the light grows, Raiskin senses that his journey is not yet done. A faint, distant shadow lingers, proof that while one wound is healed, others remain in the world beyond. The morning air outside Blackstaff Academy is crisp, the sun rising above the city's spires and casting golden light across the campus lawns. Raiskin stands at the threshold, feeling the warmth on his face, a stark contrast to the cold void he faced mere hours ago. The crowd inside still murmurs with awe and relief, but here the world feels both peaceful and vast, humming with the promise of new beginnings and the echo of old wounds. Miranel slips quietly beside him, her hand finding his. "You did it," she whispers, her voice trembling with pride, "not just for Malachar, but for all of us." Tavern joins them, grinning, the shadows in his eyes replaced by hope. From behind, Lorelei emerges, her silver ring glinting in the sunlight. She presses it back into Raiskin's palm, no longer a symbol of longing, but of reunion and possibility. The Academy's bells toll, marking the dawn of the first festival of remembrance. Students and faculty stream onto the lawn, some holding candles, others carrying tokens of loved ones and lost friends. Malachar's spirit lingers at the edge of the sunlight, now a gentle, watchful presence. Though the curse is broken, Raiskin knows the task is not finished. Beyond these walls, other shadows stir, waiting for someone brave enough to face them. As Raiskin gazes toward the horizon, the city of Waterdeep sprawls before him, alive with stories yet untold. He senses the next journey calling, the world's wounds calling for the same courage, compassion, and unity that healed the Academy. The choice is his: to rest, to teach, or to seek out the deeper darkness that remains. The dawn is his, and the story is far from over. Raiskin strides across the dew-laden lawn, his companions close at hand, their faces lit by the promise of the new day and the determination kindled by last night's ordeal. Miranel clutches her illusionist's staff, her eyes reflecting both hope and wariness for the future. Tavern adjusts the strap of his battered pack, glancing back once at the Academy's towers before setting his jaw with resolve. Lorellei's silver ring returned to her hand, stands beside Raiskin, her gaze fixed on the horizon. They pause at the Academy's iron gates, where a small crowd gathers: students, faculty, and even a few parents, each offering blessings, tokens, or tearful farewells. Archmage Randall approaches, regal and wary, pressing into Riskin's palm a crystal pendant. A beacon. Should you ever be lost to shadow, he says, voice low but warm. Malacher's spirit lingers just beyond the threshold, visible only to Raiskin and his friends. A gentle reminder of the bond they forged and the vigilance now required beyond these walls. With a final glance back at the academy, now alive with songs of remembrance, the companions step into the bustling streets of Waterdeep. The city unfolds before them, market stalls opening, ships in the harbor catching early sun, and allies where rumors of darkness still linger. The world outside beckons, full of both peril and possibility. The path ahead is uncertain, but Raiskin's heart is lighter than it has been in years, bolstered by unity, memory, and the knowledge that together they can face whatever shadows remain. As the company turns toward the road beyond Waterdeep, the sun rises higher, illuminating their first steps into a world that desperately needs the hope they now carry. The true journey, the one that will define not only Raiskin, but all who follow, has only just begun.